Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Hello, and welcome to Haman Nature. I am Adam Haman. With me, as always, my spiky buddy Tyrone. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well, Adam. How about yourself, man?
Not spiky, but as far as unspiked people go, I'm all right.
You're doing okay. Okay.
I'm all right.
Well,
Hanging in
well.
there.
After that election episode, my spikes I said had blown off, but fortunately they've grown back, and I'm back to being my spiky self. But as I was getting back into my spiky self, I took some internal reflection on myself and what has happened this last year and this election cycle, and it made me wondering, is there something more than politics that people need to be searching for and want to search for? And it reminded me of a recent article of yours that you had written, titled "Belief in Action: Why Jordan Peterson is Essentially a MISESIAN." Very interesting title. And actually, lately, Adam, for someone who describes himself as an atheist, you sure are hanging out with a lot of religious people lately. You recently had an episode with David Gornosky, Dominic Scarcella, and you also do a regular series with the great Austrian economist and libertarian hero Bob Murphy, but who is also a devout born again Christian, and is quite open about that, and talks about that quite a lot. So there's a lot going on there, Adam. But why don't you tell us about this article and kind of why an atheist such as yourself is having so much spirituality in his life lately, it seems.
I'd be happy to. I'd like to point out my hypothesis there that the election freaked you out so much that now you're trying to find God.
Exactly. There you go. That's what I was trying to get
Very
at.
interesting. Yeah, I've had a bunch of deeply religious people on the podcast, which is weird because, as you note, I am not a believer in the anthropomorphized God that most religions, Christian religions, teach us about. But I really like religious people, and it's a prelude here, foreshadowing. It's because of the way they act in the world. It doesn't really bother me that much what you believe, but the way you act is the way you interact with me. I wrote this article about Jordan Peterson. He had a very famous exchange with Sam Harris on one of their two big lecture tours, or a debate when he was doing a bunch of big lecture tours, two famous debates. And in one of them, Sam Harris is constantly trying to get Jordan Peterson to, or at least this was happening for a while, trying to get him to answer definitively, do you believe in God or not? Because one of the things Peterson does is try to show the value that can be gained from these religious stories. So he's teaching people about the Bible, but drawing lessons out of there that underscore things we know about humanity on the psychological level and neurological level and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, on stage, I can't remember who was moderating, maybe Brett Weinstein. Sam just says, do you believe in God? And Peterson thinks for a minute and he says, I act as though I believe. And after thinking about it for a long, long time, I decided, because at first I was a little annoyed, like, answer the question, man, do you believe in God or not? It's pretty simple. But then it occurred to me, like weeks later, thinking about it, that we are MISESIANs. It's demonstrated preference that matters. How we answer a poll doesn't say anything about our preferences and our value system, our hierarchy of values, as you might say. It's our actions that do that. And so I just found that very profound. Peterson is basically a MISESIAN. He's demonstrating his values by his actions, and I don't know, it hit me like a thunderbolt that really matters. Going to church every Sunday and saying you believe in God doesn't really matter. It's how you act the other 6 days of the week that describes who you are, what your system of values is, how honest you are about them, whether you mean it. So, yeah, I do like religious people, even though I will never believe. Although someone whose metaphysics is a little more like Dominic's, um, I told him I don't believe in the Sky King. The guy sitting on the cloud casting moral judgments, blah blah blah. And he said, "Yeah, I don't either." And I thought that meant he was he was moving a lot closer into the Peterson definition of what like God is, or what our conception of God is. And the cartoon one, I think, is a misconception.
So I want to jump really right to the ending. I want to come back to this this connection as you're describing him as MISESIAN, and maybe flesh that out just a little bit. But at the very end of your article, you say, "I also really like hanging," or I should say, you ended by saying this. "I also really like religious people, a whole bunch of them anyway. It's because of the way they act in the world. Their demonstrated hierarchy of values very closely mirrors my own." So, first part of the question is, what are these values? What are these hierarchy of values that are mirroring your own? Can you give a couple examples of which values you're
Yeah,
seeing mirrored?
it's generally pretty basic ones. Honesty, belief in respect for private property, freedom of association, believing in just classic virtues of hard work, being strong, um, not being two-faced. Insert your favorite superhero, or Clint Eastwood or John Wayne or whatever. Being a striving for excellence, however you define that, in everything that you do. Being oriented towards the good, preferring prosperity over poverty, uh, harmony over conflict. Um, if you were to just throw 20 or 30 things that we normally consider as virtues in Western civilization, that I'd add them to the list. And then the hierarchy part just means how you structure them, which is most important. Like telling a little white lie to your wife or something, is isn't a contradiction, because there's a higher order good, harmony in the family, blah blah blah. That's what the hierarchy part means. How you rank them.
Well, then let me go down. I was gonna have a different follow-up question to that originally, but when you threw in Western values there, so rather than saying something like just human values or human cultural values, you specifically said mirrors sort of the Western values that I have. So do you think you're getting this sort of mirror of values and compatibility with these religious folks who are predominantly Christian? Like don't feel like maybe you'd get that same sort of connection with a Buddhist, perhaps, or what? Do you have any other experience?
No, that's a great catch. I should have said human values. I was making a Western, non-Western distinction that was probably more applicable during the Cold War or something,
Mm,
or these Marxist, communist sorts of things. And yeah, I'm a big fan in general, not 100%, but in general, of Buddhist, Taoist sorts of teachings. But for a long time there, and even now, all of China is ruled over by a communist party. So um, I was just talking about an individualist sort of ethos rather than a
okay.
collectivist one. That's the distinction. But
Okay.
prior to communism taking over China, they weren't like that. These
Hmm.
religions you were talking about are far older and far more humanistic. So yeah, I should have said human values, but that's why I said Western.
Sure. Well, then let me ask the follow-up question I was originally going to do. So why is it then that this similarity of values is being produced from religion that you find attractive? I mean, how is it that you have this independent set of values that somehow you came up with on your own, presumably, versus that somehow magically or mysteriously or coincidentally seems to be mirroring the ones coming out of religion? What is it about religion that structures that and your system that somehow are producing the same results?
Boy, there's a lot of ways to answer that. The simple one is that as a product of Western civilization myself, I'm hugely impacted by Christianity with other elements like Greece and Rome, the Enlightenment. So, in one sense, what I think of as the good is hugely impacted by the history of Christianity. But on a deeper sense, I mean, you could say that religious hierarchies of value and principles came up all over the globe and crystallized over time, hopefully, you would think, towards a system of beliefs that's compatible with our nature as a species and the nature of the world that we live in. Like we always say on this show, what's Haman Nature about? We're trying to find I forget even the tagline at the beginning of the show, we're searching for a peaceful and prosperous world using human nature as a guide. We're seeking eternal truths that have to do with what our nature is. And you would think that, except for the cases where it goes off the rails, and it does, of course, all human endeavors go off the rail, but you would hope that things that try to be religions and try to create value structures that work do so in accordance with our nature, and in general come up with things that work. We make mistakes, like communism is it's a demi-religion, if not an absolute religion, and they get things all backwards and wrong. But in general, we try and come up with rules and morals and values that enable us to exist where we're at and do the best that we can at our level of development or something like that, I guess. I don't know.
Adam Heyman, everybody. Can't remember the tagline to his own show.
I'm really, really sorry. It's a good
I'm gonna
tagline.
unsubscribe from this. Oh, that's it. I'm out. No, I think that's right. I think there's only so many ways that you can organize a society. And what really religion does is just sort of codifies a set of rules, and then it turns into, morality is really just a shorthand for what to do. So, for example, there used to be a prohibition in many religions, or there still is, about not eating pigs, right? Now, why do you think they came up with that rule? It says, "Thou shalt not eat a swine," or something like that, right? Well, it's because it was dangerous to do that back then, right? Pigs carried all sorts of diseases, and it just wasn't worth it to even try to eat it. Well, how do you get people to not eat it? You can either let them figure it out for themselves. Every generation has to relearn the same rules over and over again, or you can just come with the shorthand and say, "Don't eat it." And when the little kid says, "Why don't eat it?" "Because I said so." Right? You don't need a rule. Or you don't need an explanation. It's just a rule. It comes from God, like, because God won't. Well, okay, well, and you kind of lose the reason, the knowledge for why that rule came into place, and then it becomes a religion. The rule sticks around way longer than it needs to, or to serve its purpose anymore. But the essential point I'm trying to make is those rules come about in order to just help with the survival of the species or the tribe or the group or whatever you're in. They're just a set of rules that help you survive. And there's really, because we're all human beings, we all have to breathe oxygen and drink water and find a shelter, because we all have to do the similar type of things to survive. We end up with a similar set of rules across all societies and cultures when it comes to religion. Now, it may differ here and there a little bit, right? But in general, you've got the prohibitions against murder and stealing and other things like that. So since your values come from human nature, and the religious moral codes also came from human nature a long time ago, just in a sort of a different way, not really intellectually or philosophically thinking about it, but just more through experience. It makes sense that they kind of align, but you shouldn't take that alignment as then an endorsement of those religions. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, for sure. And can't stress enough that we are prone to error as we're going through this process. Plenty of cultures over periods of history have had a dictatorial model, or the one chieftain makes all the rules, or whatever. Communism
Right.
was a huge mistake.
Mhm.
And it's not about where we end up, because there is no end, hopefully, unless we destroy ourselves as a species. But you would like to think that this is a discovery process that's going on since the development of our prefrontal cortex until we expire. We are constantly trying to discover what the proper hierarchy of values is for our species. And when Peterson talks about it, he Sam Harris was trying to get him to figure out, ask him what God is. And then he said a whole bunch of things that don't answer that question. He talks about the nature of human consciousness over an iterative game across, centuries, millennia, um, such that the value structure, it's like what I was saying earlier, it is best in accordance with our nature and the earth we find ourselves in. And that doesn't sound anything like how any religion describes what God is. But those religions are usually using shorthand, and they're writing these stories long, long ago when you're trying to say something powerful. Maybe the right thing to do is call it a God and make it a powerful thing. I don't know. But no, I mean, just by saying that, I think that a lot of truths can be found by seeing where all of these religions over time and across the world intersect and overlap, where you start to see consistencies. That's where you should start to suspect that you're approaching something that's meaningful and true. And the differences, maybe one of them is right and one of them is wrong, or maybe it's just something specific to certain culture or something. But I do think there are deep truths in those areas of accordance. As you said, murder. I think there is such a thing as right and wrong, and just vengeful or murder to gain an advantage. I just don't think that's ever going to be a general rule. That's a good thing to do. Eating your babies is just never going to be good.
Mhm.
You go
Let
ahead.
me go back to your connection to calling Jordan a MISESIAN, to get that shocking headline, so to speak. So I'll push back on that a little bit, I think, here. I think people have a tendency to try to make any sort of connection they can to bolster their case, or like they really like something for whatever reason. They try to find another reason to attach to it to really be more supportive of them. It's like if Taylor Swift said just one thing at a concert, like, I really love bubblegum. Then all the bubblegum people out there are like, well, see, Swifty is a bubblegum person, or something like that. Or when yes, okay, it's a Misesian principle, I guess. But I mean, there's a lot more you need to just call yourself a Misesian too. I think this just goes back to the old adage that has probably been around for thousands of years. It's what what your mother used to told you. It's like, it's not what people say, it's what they do, right? It's like,
Sure.
okay, is that Misesian? Sure. Or is it just sort of, I don't know, common folksy wisdom there? So defend yourself for calling
Well,
Jordan Peterson a Misesian.
one of the reasons Misesianism was necessary is that people weren't paying attention to common sense advice. It was, I mean, sort of like we're doing right now in the culture. We're sort of having to relearn after 200,000 years what the difference between a man and a woman is.
Mm,
Sometimes people go nuts. Sometimes people construct economic theories and forget what their assumptions were, and then have to realize that, oh yeah, demonstrated preference really does matter more than what you say you believe. And we talk about it a lot on this show, that language can get sloppy and it leads to thinking sloppily.
right.
And asking somebody what they believe about their metaphysics is a shorthand. You're really trying to get at, how do you act in this world? And you're using as a shorthand, tell me what you think about the nature of things. Do you pray to Zeus every day, or, what's it all about? But
Right.
we're not interested in what they think. We're interested in how, when I see you tomorrow and for the next several years, we're in the same village or whatever, how can I expect you to behave? That's what matters.
Mm,
And yeah, I'm just trying to use a shock headline. Peterson is Misesian, sure, but But that distinction really matters because we forget it so often. We think that what you say you believe is what matters, and it just doesn't. There are people that believe in a version of a religion that just to me looks like a really dumb cartoon. And, and maybe if I were younger, I would disparage them for that. But then I realized that they're living a very happy life, and all my interactions with them are powerful, and they mirror my hierarchy of values and kindness and eagerness to help and all the virtues of excellence that I would want in a neighbor or a friend or a colleague. And it's like, oh, well, what they think doesn't really matter, does it? It's how they act that matters. And I mean, you weren't trying to pick a fight, Tyrone. I get it. But calling a simple truth trite, it's not trite when most people forget it, when most people act like what you say. Like people are being villainized left, right, and center for who they voted for. That doesn't really matter. What matters is, is this your friend and your neighbor and your loved one and your family member? Do they still love you and do they still act right? Don't take the shorthand identifier of what a person is all about and assume that isn't anywhere nearly as meaningful as the way they act towards you and towards others in the world. That it's trite, yeah, but it's true.
So remember, folks, your one takeaway from this episode is doesn't matter what you think, only matters what you do, which means you don't have to listen to us anymore because we're just talking words. So it doesn't matter what you think. Good job, Adam. Way to sell this thing.
I mean, if I said those words, it doesn't matter. I was being... There is a relationship between what you think and how you act. That of course, that's true. But some people think it's like a one-to-one correlation, and it's not, obviously. But yes, I mean, the way we inform how we're going to behave in the future is with our thoughts. I mean, that's clearly true. So,
all right, Adam. Well, another interesting topic. I would encourage people to go check out our Substack for more interesting articles like this, or go back and read this full one, and all the links that you always put in there are really good reference materials as well.
To that end, we didn't play it in this episode, but I'm going to link to the brief section where Sam Harris asked Jordan Peterson what he means by God, and he starts doing a little bit more articulate reformation that I tried to just give in parentheses about what he really means when he thinks about God. And it is about a hierarchy of human values. It's not about some sky king. And I think he's onto something there. So thanks for introducing a great topic, Tyrone. I'm sorry I was not so artful in describing it, but I do think there's an important truth there. And it is MISESIAN. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, my spiky friend.
We're professionals here, folks. We're professionals.
I mean, these ideas are so big and we don't have words for them. It makes it difficult. Like right here at the end, I'll make a brief plug. His Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, I think it's his first one. It's what he turned his dissertation into. It's one of the greatest books I've ever read, and it's really hard. It's really difficult to read because he's talking about ideas. So, well, you said trite. It's sort of another way of saying something super deep and integral, important. That's so obviously true that we don't even talk about it. And it's hard to figure out how to use what kind of words to use when you're talking about stuff like that. So I'll put a link to that video, and I'll put a link to Maps of Meaning because it is a great book. It's challenging, but it's great. So thanks for suffering through that with us, Haman Nature watchers and viewers. We appreciate it. Hit all the buttons, likes and subscribes, and me and Tyrone will see you next time on Haman Nature.